chose Saul to be the first king of Israel. And it's my understanding that Saul, in the early years of his reign, was a rather successful king. But as time passed, Saul let Satan separate him from God. God, knowing this, sent Samuel to the house of Jesse to anoint David as Israel's new future king. This saying kind of goes without too much thought, but it reveals God's actions. And we must remember that God chooses who He chooses when He chooses. Saul began to develop a bad case of jealousy, especially after David defeated Goliath in that battle, which resulted in a complete victory for Israel that day against the Philistines. As David began to lead the armies of Israel against the Philistines, he was very successful. So successful that the people began to say, "Oh, Saul has killed his thousands. But David, he has killed his 10,000s." As David being part of the king's court, a friendship developed between David and Saul's son Jonathan. In time, both Saul and Jonathan realized and became aware that David would be the future king. But Jonathan appears to have accepted the actions of God, and he accepted David as God's choice. Let's pick up the story in 1 Samuel 20, 1 through 3. 1 Samuel 20, 1 through 3. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and went and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? And what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life?" So Jonathan said to him, "By no means, you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing, either great or small, without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." Then David took an oath again and said, "Your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes. And he has said, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but one step between me and death.'" Jonathan protected David numerous times. So it's no wonder that these two boys didn't develop a kindred spirit between them. Continuing in verse 14 of the 20th chapter, and in this case I'm going to use the clear word paraphrase to get a little clearer meaning. "I," meaning Jonathan, "know God has called you to rule Israel. So when you take over, if I am still alive, be merciful to me. If I get killed before then, take care of my family as long as they live. I know the Lord will help you defeat your enemies, but don't forget to be kind to my family. So let's keep this agreement we have made with each other, because there's no doubt in my mind that the Lord will remove your enemies." Then Jonathan asked David to seal the brotherly agreement they had made with each other with an oath, which David did. And Jonathan did the same thing because he loved David as much as he loved himself. David and Jonathan made a covenant between them, a contract, that they would look after each other's descendants. Why? Both were soldiers who could lose their lives in battle. Both were married, and Jonathan had children. But I think Jonathan had another reason. It was the usual custom of new kings in that day that their opponents and their families were to be eliminated because they didn't want rivals to the throne. So I think Jonathan was also looking after his wife and children in this case, saying, David, please show kindness to my family. Saul and Jonathan did lose their lives in battle. And in time, all the tribes of Israel were united as a nation under the rule of David. Roughly 20 years later, David is sitting on his throne, and it pops in his mind that he made a pact with Jonathan. He recalls his promise that he was to take care for Jonathan's family. Let's look at 2 Samuel 9:1, and it says this. Now David said, is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? This word kind or kindness comes from the Hebrew word chesed. And we find the word numerous times in the Bible. One time it's in Ruth 1:8, where Ruth offers her blessing upon her daughter-in-laws. And also in 2 Samuel 2:6, David commends the men of Gilead for the proper burial of King Saul. And then we find in 2 Samuel 9:2 and 3 that there is a descendant, Mephibosheth. I'm not real good at this name, but anyway, he's aware now that he's alive. And so he sends his messengers to find him. And I'm sure that this man was scared to death when David's party arrived and asked him to come before the king. And we find evidence of that in verse 6 of 2 Samuel. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, here is your servant. I think there was a concern on this man's heart when he came before the king. As a matter of fact, and this is from my imagination, not putting it to knowing human life, or example, I'm sure he was terrified. I'm sure he thought soon that he would be executed because he was the last descendant of Jonathan and Saul, and he would be technically, rightfully, to be the king. So he may have been begging for his life, and certainly to the point of worshiping David. But David, in honor of his covenant with Jonathan, assured him, don't be afraid. You are my guest, and I'm going to restore all your grandfather's assets to you. Now this phrase, do not be afraid, is found in the Scriptures. When Gabriel announced to Mary that she was to be the Messiah, the mother of the Messiah, we find the words, don't be afraid. And in Matthew 14:27, when Jesus was walking on the water and he's coming towards the boat and towards the disciples, he told them, don't be afraid. So what promises do we need to keep? Promises to the Lord, to our wives or husband, children or employer. We need to be just as faithful with our promises as David was to Jonathan. Recently I was at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Beltsville, Maryland. And their pastor is Pastor Kermit Nettleberg. And he told this story on himself. He was a senior at Maplewood Academy in Minnesota at the age of 17. And all the students were required to take a Bible class taught by their church pastor and school pastor. And in the second week, the pastor gave the students the assignment of study, the book of Ellen White, Messages to Young People. Now, Kermit claimed that he had already read and studied the book and wondered if he could substitute the book Christian Education. Approaching the pastor agreed, yes, that would be acceptable. A couple of 3 days later, the pastor asked Kermit to stay after class. And he said he wanted to talk to Kermit. He had reviewed his decision about having him study Christian education. He said to Kermit, he said, now, you're a good student. As a matter of fact, I think you got A's all the way through academy. And I got a proposition for you. I'll let you miss class all semester, and I'll give you an A. Did you catch what I said? You can miss class all the semester, and I'll give you an A. Now, that's not what you want to tell a 17-year-old boy. What did he do? He abused the privilege and goofed off the time. And towards the end of the semester, he began wondering, what grade am I going to get? What grade am I going to get? Now, let me ask you a question. What grade did he deserve? I think we would all agree that he would deserve an F. But what grade did he get? He got an A. You see, his grade was based upon the pastor's promise and not upon his performance. The grade was based upon the pastor's promise and not his performance. What about you and me? We are all sinners. We have come short of the glory of God. We have come short of the expectations of God. And is our salvation based upon the performance of works or upon the promise? The promises of Jesus. What do we deserve? We deserve eternal separation from God. But we have Jesus' promises. And what are these promises? One is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn, but the world through him might be saved. In John 11:25 and 26, Jesus said to her, and this was Martha at the time of Lazarus' resurrection, "I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Folks, you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to be anxious. You don't need to have a panic attack. Because Jesus has promised that by our faith and by his grace, we can be saved. Today, you can accept his invitation and receive the assurance of salvation. When will we see the fulfillment of his promise? At Jesus' second coming.